Hey guys, it's Lily. So today we're going to be talking about how much caffeine is too much and how does it affect your health mentally and physically. Let's talk about it. So first, let's go with what experts say. This specific time, I'm going to be referencing the European Food Safety Authority and their studies in caffeine. So the EFSA recommends that most healthy adults being aged 18 to 65 consume no more than about 319 milligrams of caffeine per day. This is a general guideline and it does not take into account body size, metabolism, or medical conditions. Some people tolerate less, while some people can handle more. So 319 is a blanket statement. Don't consume more than that. But my immediate problem with that is if that's your blanket statement, the average man is like 5'7" and the average woman's like 5'4". And I don't actually, let's look it up. Average man and average woman. Okay, so for every man, every ethnicity, average height is 5 foot 8.9 inches, and the average body weight distribution, I thought it was just going to tell me average penis size. 2023 found that the size increased about 10%. Oh, okay. Okay. Anyway, what I came here for. The average male body is about 5 foot 8 inches, between 177 and 208 pounds. Blanket statement, even assuming they're all 5 foot 8, that's still a average weight distribution of 177 to 208. 30 pounds is a relative significant difference when it talks to how you carry it, how it affects your heart already, and then affecting the caffeine consumption, right? So I already have a problem with that blanket statement, but it's fine. Sure. General person, 319 milligrams. This is going to disappoint a lot of young people when I tell you you're already past that 300 milligrams of caffeine if you consume 2 Alanis or 2 Celsius a day. And you're very close to approaching it if you consume 2 Monsters. So, what does that caffeine consumption look like in real life? I just said the Alani and Celsius and Monster. Well, Gorilla Mind, specifically pre-workout, 2 scoops of that's already 400 milligrams. 1 espresso shot is 80 milligrams. You get that espresso shot in lattes, macchiatos. Macchiatos are almost always double. So Dunkin's medium macchiato is already 4 shots. So 4 times 8 is 320. So a medium macchiato already puts you at your recommended milligrams of caffeine for the day. Not a Diet Coke, a regular Coca-Cola has 40 milligrams. So say you have your afternoon Coke, and then you have you have your Alani as your pre-workout, that's 200 milligrams. You had an afternoon Coke to get through the last little bit of your work, that's 250 roughly milligrams. Okay, so now 319 is our recommendation, but I'm a little tired at the end of the day, so let me have a black coffee is about 60 milligrams. 60? 50. So now you're at 300 milligrams. So it's kind of just think about like how those little things add up to what is already a lower amount of caffeine than I know I was always told 400 milligrams. 319 is significantly less, and 400 milligrams is also very different to a 6-foot man or a 5-foot woman. Not even taking into account other heart effects. So now that we've talked about that, I fell into a rabbit hole of how caffeine actually works, because you hear people talk about building tolerances or craving more or different ways the caffeine affects them. So how does caffeine work? Caffeine works by blocking adenosine receptors in your brain. And so normally adenosine receptors build up throughout the day and signal your body that it's time to rest, that it's tired. So these receptors start popping up in your brain to tell you that you're losing energy, that you're tired. And so what caffeine does is as these receptors are popping up, caffeine connects to those receptors, blocking that feeling of being tired. But then this is where tolerances come in, because you have way more than 3, but we're going to say 3. You have way more than 3 in your brain actually, but let's say you have 3 adenosine receptors, and caffeine, 100 milligrams of caffeine can block those 3 receptors just fine. But over time, you can actually develop more receptors. And so now your 100 milligrams is covering those 3, but you have now compensated for that by developing more receptors. And that's where you're like, oh, I need more caffeine, or I'm still tired if I have caffeine. And this is a problem I actually ran into relatively quickly alongside some other issues I was already having. Let's talk about all of that. So for a while, I started every morning with coffee. I mean, I turned 18 and immediately went into the school system. So like my mom always had coffee first thing in the morning. Everybody I worked with had coffee first thing in the morning. I was like, okay, coffee first thing in the morning, of course. And then by the time I started to be more aware of like my protein intake, I was like, okay, well, let's have a protein shake with my coffee. It's fine. And then every now and then I would have pre-workout, but it wasn't consistent. And then after a year or so of that, I started taking Concerta, which is a ADHD medication that is a stimulant. And I noticed if I took that, I felt like my caffeine was less effective. And so I actually ended up talking to my psychologist about this, and she was like, yeah, that happens. It can actually kind of undo the effects of your stimulants if you take more stimulants, because they are trying to stimulate your brain in different ways. And so I noticed that the caffeine made my Concerta less effective, and at the same time I was also becoming more aware of my heart rate, because I have a family history of heart issues, and I already had existing general anxiety that I was medicated separately for. So I was very aware of my heart rate, and I was like concerned about it spiking, or I could feel it if I started to have an anxiety attack, obviously. So I stopped taking Concerta. And then eventually I started to like rotate between the protein shake or like homemade creamers in my coffee. And then I began trying Alani or Celsius to just try to completely get away from creamers, and the homemade creamers just weren't really working the way I wanted them to. And I would try to push it further back in the day so that I felt like it lasted longer, right? And then eventually I started having a coffee every morning and an Alani or Celsius every afternoon, and that's easily 300 milligrams of caffeine. And I was like, okay, I need to cut something. So I started to start my day with tea, so that I still had a same serotonin drink, kind of boost my morale without having too much caffeine. And in the afternoons, I started switching my Alanis and Celsius to coffees or an espresso-based drink. Now, I sometimes have tea in the morning, but not usually. I'm actually more recently trying to do lemon water with some of my supplements. Why was that word not working? With my supplements. So right now I have an Americano in the afternoons. Well, like noonish. And I specifically have an Americano at this point because it's the least amount of calories with what I feel is the most control over what is in what I'm consuming. I was having Alani's because I felt like they were the cleanest ingredient list. But then I switched to Americanos because it's just espresso and water, and then whatever flavor you want to add. So I have more control over the ingredient list as well as the calories. All of that being said, and all of that talking about how caffeine interacted with my medications, my anxiety, let's talk about the mixed effects of caffeine, because it's not all good and it's not all bad, right? Side effects of caffeine aren't universally good or bad, and research actually varies because results depend on individual factors like medications, medical conditions, and body chemistry. But some pretty consistent negatives that different people talk about include increased anxiety, raised heart rate, and in some cases, increased caffeine can trigger heart palpitations, especially in people who already have heart concerns or high caffeine tolerances. However, there are some positives, right? Okay, so the possible positives of caffeine, specifically coffee, actually include that it's rich in antioxidants. So drinking black coffee is believed to actually help protect your cells from damage, as well as support heart and metabolic health when consumed moderately. And it actually might support brain health by improving alertness and possibly reducing the risk of neurodegenerative diseases. As well as it could also support liver function. Some studies have actually shown lower risk of liver disease among regular black coffee drinkers. And so, why does drinking caffeine affect people so differently? Well, some of the obvious things like genetics, metabolism, and tolerance are, of course, important in that. Where some people can process caffeine really quickly, while others feel a crash as the blocked adenosine receptors flood back into their systems once all the caffeine has worn off. So just like drinking alcohol or smoking, some people feel it faster and come out of it quicker, while others could be in a prolonged state of the peak experience, right? As well as something a lot of people might have started to notice is specifically energy drinks have a lot of added nutrients, or at least like Alani, for example, does. And that ingredient that often helps people that they don't realize is B12. B12 is essential for producing healthy red blood cells, supporting nerve function and brain health, working with folate to create DNA, and helping convert food into usable energy. And so that's why a lot of energy companies add it, is they get to enhance the label, even though the real energy boost usually comes from the caffeine and sugar. Putting B12 on there makes it seem like more of a healthier option. But if you notice, a lot of people who have ADHD tendencies gear towards those energy drinks that have B12 in them. Research from 2019, 2020, and 2024 found that children with ADHD tend to have lower B12 levels. And so in turn, that has translated to the thought process that people displaying ADHD tendencies, when consuming increased B12 from energy drinks, it actually is thought to reduce fatigue and improve focus, though it's not considered a treatment for ADHD in itself. So which drinks do contain B12? Red Bull, Monsters, Celsius, Alani, Bang, and Rockstar. But regular coffee, espresso, and black tea do not contain B12. All of this to say, just be aware of what you're drinking. It may not affect you, and you might be fine with your 1 cup of coffee. In fact, a lot of people recommend a cup of coffee every morning, a black cup of coffee every morning. But once you start getting into a regular consumption of a cup of coffee and 2 energy drinks, it starts to create this kind of hidden stressor that you may not be aware you're doing to yourself. So just be aware of those additives to your drinks and your regular caffeine consumption. Use it wisely and balance what works for your own body. Bye, guys.